You might know Qixxit, the company I'm working for as a VP engineering, from the recent Elixir documentary, where we were featured. So that got us quite some attraction, nice. And there's one interesting thing that we are also working in mobility. So we started with a keynote on mobility, we're going to end with one on mobility from a totally different angle. I'm, let's say, software engineering, not on the product side of things, but my knowledge on Elixir is actually pretty limited. I joined Qixxit 4 months ago, and that was my first contact with Elixir. So bear with me if there's things in there that seem too obvious to you. I'm sorry for that. So the whole presentation is a team effort. Mostly my backend developer team, 6 Elixir developers, have been very active in producing slides for me. Thanks to them, we have one of them here today at the far. So if there's any technical questions, I'm just going to refer to him. And it has been a long day. It has been a pretty interesting day for me, I hope for you too. And the most interesting part was actually that, especially in the morning, I saw a lot of links to my presentation. I was excited taking notes and marking where I saw connections. So I'm trying to pull in everything that happened, that was said here, and try to connect this a little bit. In the afternoon, it got a little bit more tricky, but let's see how far I get with that. I kind of put this as a challenge for myself. So what I'm going to talk about is Elixir in product development, and we have this catchy title, Elixir for Curing Product Development Pains. And I'm going to just skip the subtitle. You had enough time to read it. This is a brief overview on what I want to talk about to give you some impression where we are going. And the first thing, what I'm going to do is to tell you a little bit about how we at Qixxit actually started with Elixir, why we picked Elixir from a product development perspective. That's kind of the opposite to what Powell was saying in the morning. In some way, you will see that there's some references to what he said, but let's get into that. We are going to look at the core advantages that everyone knows, so I'll keep this section rather short. But it was interesting to see this showing up in some of the talks. All right, then I want to look at the ecosystem and the community in there, and the community basically as what does it mean? How does it help with that? I'm going to have some code samples, and I'm trying to match them to what was said today, but let's see how far my Elixir knowledge gets me on that. And I'm always trying to put them into a product development perspective. And finally, we are going to look at some things where there's a little bit of improvement possible, which is type safety. The Elixir was mentioned a few times, and design patterns, which actually Peter was talking about VC and domain-driven design, which I'm going to pick up. I want to take you on a journey. We are in the travel industry. Qixxit is in the travel industry. We are trying to make people travel. And so I tried to build this presentation in a way that I'm taking you onto a journey to answer my question, which means that we are going to look at what is product development in general, and then going to move on to some examples. And at the end, I'm going to pick up that question and try to answer it. Travel industry means that there is some domain-specific things that are maybe not that well known. And one of them is intermodal as a travel mode. And intermodal means basically that in one single journey, I'm going to change the kind of transport. So I flew in this morning from Berlin, and because it was so early, I actually took a cab to the airport. And then I came by train, by public transport, to Liverpool Street Station here, which is 3 different types of transport. It's an intermodal journey. In that case, it was an easy one because it was local transport to everyone can use. If I'm going to make this a little bit more complicated and going to smaller cities where there's no airport, I need to check the proper train schedules and so on. Multimodal instead is actually if you're just using different transport, kind of transports, like you go to work by bike one day and the other day you go by public transport. So as I said, or if you look at the title, at the question again, Elixir as a cure for product development pains. I'm just assuming you all know Elixir and you know it better than I, so I'm going to skip that part. I'm assuming that cure is also understood as a term, some medication or some remedy, which obviously also evokes that idea of elixir as a drink, which I don't want to go into further here. Product development, it's a little bit more tricky in some way. I've seen a few comments today on that, but what are the problems actually? Because that's where the pain comes from. And wanted to make sure that we all have a common understanding on what I understand by product development. Otherwise, it's going to be difficult to answer that question. So definitely product development, for starters, it's just getting some new product or modify some product and getting it onto the market, getting it to consumers or to businesses. But you've all been there. There's never enough time, and you are always out of budget, or there's not enough money. And meanwhile, management wants to know when you are done and actually what you are going to deliver. And those questions you cannot answer in most cases. I mean, if you can, I'm amazed. Let me know that secret, right? And on the opposite side, we want to write good code, well-crafted software, steadily adding value. When Qixxit was started, the software craftsmanship was one of the core values in the engineering team there, and I tried to keep it that way, while avoiding the term software craftsmanship, using a little bit more gender mainstreamed terms for that. Now, in my own words, finding a balance between time, scope, and quality. That's the problem with product development. Want to deliver on specific time, I need some scope, and I want to deliver in quality. And actually, you can imagine this as a triangle, and you can always optimize for two of those things, which will actually hurt the third one. So you can be fast and deliver on scope, but the quality will suck. And you can deliver in high quality and full scope, but then you are going to take an infinite amount of time. So we could talk about processes, like agile or waterfall, as product development procedures. We could talk about user experience design, how to make a nice user interface. It's not that interesting for Elixir developers, I suppose. We could talk about workflows or resource planning. Some of those things, like the agile processes, Powell, in his keynote this morning, he referenced them actually. And I don't want to go there. I also don't want to go purely on technology. We could just talk about Elixir. As I said, not my core domain, so I'm going to be careful on that. We could talk about software development as a craft, but that's not why we are here. We could look into how to assure quality through processes. So we would be back to the first one again. Through test-driven development, all kind of things. But there would be the product idea missing in there. And to be a little bit polemic, what is the purpose of all that? The purpose is to build a nice product. So this is a ticket, a train ticket, that allows me to go to Rome from some Italian train station. It has some text on it. So if you look at it, first thing that you notice, it's on special paper. So you need to go somewhere where there is the special paper to get this ticket. Train station, vending machines. There is some text on it, I don't understand, it's Italian. I can guess. Validare, convalidare probably means to stamp it somewhere. So yeah, maybe that's what it says. but I just want to go to Rome. I don't want this ticket on security paper. And that is actually what Qixxit is about. We want to make you travel to get you to your destination, basically. And it's easy if you have an airport. You go to the airport, board a plane, and go to Rome. If you are from a small town and you want to go to Rome, you first need to go to an airport. That means that you need to check the connections to the airport. You actually need to find out what airport is the most convenient one. I think London has 5 airports that are somewhere in the vicinity. All of them are different complexity to reach. And we try to solve that problem for you. So, are you still awake? Yeah, kind of. Okay. Who has been to Rome? Sign of hand. Okay, that's actually pretty okay. And who had to actually do an intermodal travel to get there, excluding the public transport part? Who went there from a small town? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so you at least should understand the pains of picking that out. I hope so. I hope the others can imagine, even if you are lucky to live in big cities. So we can formulate some requirements for our product, and I'm doing this now in a very generic way. We need to find a route which involves checking different possible connections to different airports. We need to search for the price, the best price, because you obviously want to fly cheap, or you want to travel cheap, fast, convenient. I mean, if you first go by bus to some train station and then by train to the airport, that might be too much. You might prefer to have only one change in there. And then at the end, we need to get a ticket. But let's ignore that ticket part. That is kind of boring, straightforward in some way. Now, this is a little bit small. I'm sorry for that. I'm going to have this a little bit bigger. We are going to look into this in more detail. This is the view from our iOS app. And what it shows you, basically, let's see if I get this pointer working here, at least on one. We are traveling from Wolfsburg, which is a small, not small, but a German city. It's where Volkswagen is made, so you might have heard of that city. Wolfsburg is nice in that sense that it has a fast train connection, but no airport. And you have a few airports around it that you can travel to, but it's not an obvious choice. You could go to Berlin, which I picked here. You could also go to, what else is in there? Hamburg and Leipzig to travel to Rome. But if you want to figure this out on your own, you are quite busy. So what I want to do now is to show you briefly how we are actually doing this, because this is why we picked Elixir. And if you look at the map, this is a little bit bigger, a little bit better to read. That's what it would look like, basically. You would go from Wolfsburg to Berlin and then fly to Rome. Let's zoom in a little bit. And you already see that there is potentially more airports. I mentioned them briefly. Hamburg, Cologne, Leipzig, Bremen, they all have airports. Now, if we go for the technical implementation, and this is now a very rough overview on that, because this is our core IP, so I'm not going to share how we really do that. This is a list of the commercial airports, or a map of the commercial airports. And there's Wolfsburg just in the middle of it. So what we are going, when a user asks actually to go from Wolfsburg to Rome, what we are doing is to check all those connections, how you get to the airport and then from the airport the flight. So 5 is kind of a number we learned by experience, that this is a reasonable amount of airports to check, but that means that for this one request from a user, we are actually going to check 5 airports for flights to Rome, we check 5 times for flights to Rome, and we check for buses to the airports and trains to the airports. So we are doing 15 requests just to answer that one single query. It's actually a little bit more requests because some of them are, some providers need more requests. And then we are combining those results. And that made us think of Elixir as a technology to use. Now, out of those requirements, just that you understand the complexity that is in travel, in the travel domain. There is a lot of domain-specific problems that are hidden in there. This is changing right now. It's getting easier. I think the UK is still on paper tickets for trains, or is it by now, did they switch to mobile tickets? By paper, yeah. I think they are working on this since a few years, but they are still on paper tickets. I think every other rail company by now in Europe does mobile tickets. Yeah, this means that you have to go to the station. Now in the UK, it's kind of convenient. You can go with your credit card and print a ticket at the station, which is okay, but still. We are talking about companies that have more than a century of history. They didn't understand about APIs or partnerships at all 5 years ago. It's getting more open, more flexible. But 5 years ago, they would never have talked to a startup at all. If I would have gone to Deutsche Bahn and told them I want to do an integration, I want to sell your tickets, they would have said, we don't care. And they learned, and they changed, and they are doing it now. But it also means that we have a lot of problematic APIs. Now, Deutsche Bahn is actually one of the nice ones. If you go more South Europe, Mediterranean countries, it's getting more interesting. Sometimes systems are just not available at night. Or you call one of the providers and they figure out, yeah, this machine that was standing under the desk of one of the developers, it broke, and they need to restart it or replace it. And also there's a lot of very specific logic in there that is national, very different, like the seat reservation processes or the bonus cards. Now, we don't care about those problems, right? Because you just want to travel to Rome. So we want to build a nice product with a nice, convenient user experience that hides all that complexity from the user. And we want a technology that is fault tolerant, scales, and works well with all those unreliable third-party APIs. And that's Elixir. It's actually Elixir on Erlang OTP on the Beam virtual machine, where we leverage those platform features that we heard about today and that you all know. So I don't have to go into those. Thanks for that. It also allowed us to rapidly build a prototype. And that's what Ivadne said this. Did I pronounce the name correctly? Probably not. Said this morning that this rapid prototyping is actually very helpful to convince people to use Elixir. And that's what happened for us, basically, that we were just picking Elixir as a language, building it. It worked very well. And we could actually solve the product problem with Elixir. There's one other thing which is kind of important in that sense, is that by now there is enough developers in Elixir available. A few years ago, or like a year ago, that would have been a little bit more tricky. Now it's, for a company decision, it's important to know that there's developers available. Now, that's a simple observation, which is actually a surprise in our line of business. I've been working in a company doing basically the same thing before. I was using Java as a technology, and we had load problems every other week. And at Qixxit, it just works, which is very convenient because you don't have to care about that and you can actually spend your time on doing other things. And what we used our time for is to do some iterations on the routing algorithm. So what I showed you earlier was first implemented with a naive approach using an external graph algorithm. We had time to learn about the domain, understand all those things I was referring to, develop a new algorithm that is now running in Elixir. And by that, we have all our backend technology in Elixir, which reduces the complexity considerably and allows us to move even faster. And gives us better quality. Now, so much on the core platform of Elixir that helps us a lot. There's nothing magic in there, in a way. It's just there, and we didn't do any specific things. We didn't have to optimize anything here. But we could build a good product out of this. The second section, which is important, is the ecosystem. And we learned a lot about this today. Or at least I learned a lot about this. I'm not sure how much was new for you guys, but let's assume there was also some new things in there for you. There's plenty of tools to choose from. There's Phoenix, which is pretty common, I understand, which helped us a lot with the rapid prototyping, which we have WebSockets connections by free, basically, into our apps and to our web client, which in other languages might have been a little bit more tricky. We are going to look a little bit at Ecto and how we use it. And then I picked two kind of random examples, which might be smaller tools, which just helped us a lot. It's kind of the same. What we learned this morning, again, is that this availability of the tools makes it easy to adopt things in Elixir. Now, not sure how many of you actually remember that in around 2000, the year 2000, there came this acronym. Actually, the acronym is a little bit younger, SOLID, which is out of object-oriented programming. What we actually learned, and I'm going to refer to that a little bit, is that this helps to use those patterns in some way, with some understanding. Don't ignore the learnings from the last 20 years. Look at them, adapt them. And we're going to look at single responsibility principle, open-closed principle, and a little bit on the substitution principle in here, which is the design by contract. But we're going to look at some source code now. And the first example is how we implemented copy on write with Ecto. So you remember that I mentioned this unreliable third-party IPS. I hope you remember that. And if I want to sell tickets, I actually need to collect money from users. And if you want to do that, you want to be sure and safe and make this reliable. So we want to have history, and we want to have history of the events. Now, you would normally go for event sourcing approach, probably. We looked at that and then decided against it for various reasons. The most important one is that we actually know databases pretty well in the team, and we wanted to have something which works on a database and keeps the state in the database. You remember the talk from Maciej on distributed problems with distributed systems? And what we are doing here, we are sharing the state in the database. You could have done this also with event sourcing implementations, but we wanted to keep it simple. Now, this is a simple wrapper around Ecto. And what we do is just have a update function that actually inserts. There's some pattern matching in there, I suppose. I hope this is actually pattern matching. And don't get lost too much into that code. The only confusing thing here is that instead of it doesn't do an update, but it uses insert and then internally Ecto semantics. So Ecto is actually encapsulated, which means that we are not exporting the change set, or we are not making the change set visible to the caller of that function, which makes our interaction with the upper layer basically a lot easier, because we don't need that change set. We are actually storing the change set in the database in a way. We are keeping track of the changes. So this is nothing new. In a way, it's very simple. Learnings out of this encapsulate. We get easy unit testing. And, as I said, return a simple value. And in a way, it's a very naive solution to the problem, but a very clean and nice. The whole file has around 100 lines for that implementation. I just took a part out of them, so it's very readable, easy to understand, and easy to test. The second example is about the open API specs use. And I think most of you have been facing some similar situation that the front-end developer actually wants to know what's the return value of an API call. Now, GraphQL is one very nice solution for that. I don't want to go into the details of if it would solve that problem or not. I'm going to show another possible solution from my point of view. What you would do in that case is to dig into the source code probably, or into the documentation, but the documentation will be outdated, and potentially just a field name misspelled in the end will make your life very hard. With open API specs, we get this nice Swagger UI access for the front-end developers. We get our models in there, which make it kind of clear what's happening. And there is a nice side story to that, because what we managed with what this allowed us to do is basically to implement an API change that made the searches 10 times faster. And 10 times is a big change. We learned about the domain. We found a way to do this a lot faster. And we could do it easily because we had this documentation in place, this living documentation that the front-end developers could use to follow those changes. Possible because we have the domain knowledge and the tooling and ecosystem is there, which we could actually use. So the third example is stream data for propriety testing, which Joey showed us. I think it was the first talk after the lunch break, or the one before the lunch break, which is actually very nice because now this is a use case that is a practical use case, what you can do with propriety testing. Now we got this nicely improved router. It's faster, it's more reliable, it works in Elixir, so we should be able to test it. And that is actually, it's a little bit optimized for readability, but it's more or less the real code that does the test. A locality is kind of a station or a place in our terms. So what this does is actually we say an intermodal route has to have, for every city or for every train station in Germany, we want to be possible to connect it to every airport or to any airport in the world. By going with the train to the airport or to the city associated with the airport and then flying from there. And we want to make sure that we find all those combinations. And we are going to look at the German or international localities function in a minute. That's the next slide. But what you basically, this returns the list of these localities, we get them into origin and destination. We make sure that we are not comparing or not searching for a route that is actually going to the same place again. And one of them needs to be in Germany, origin or destination. And then we are just checking if there is actually a route in there. Should be pretty easy and straightforward to understand, I hope so. Let me know if you need more time to read through it. Let's look at the stream data, which is actually in the next function. So again, we just take localities and then check if they are in Germany and have a station, or if they have an airport. Then return the locality. So this, I would, to quote Joey, I hope I'm not misphrasing him, but test the properties that matters to us. And that thing here really matters to us. This is our core mission to make that happen. We could test that. And I understand that the stream data thing is actually a new functionality, or rather newish, like a year, a little bit more than a year old. So it was very convenient for us to have that available now. Made an easy and simple test case. Result of that is actually we have a happy product team, because they get tested what they actually, they couldn't figure this out before, what they actually wanted to test, and now they have a very nice test that they can understand. I mean, not the code in the test, but the description of the test. And I'm just repeating the same slide than before, because it was possible because we learned about the domain, and we have the tooling and ecosystem in place to make it happen, like the stream data functionality. Now, this is also available in other languages. So we could just go for any other language to write those tests somewhere. It would not necessarily look that nice, but we would miss the platform features. Scalability, fault tolerance, and so on. So in that combination, it makes a lot of sense to use Elixir. Now, not all is that shiny. Some things don't go that well. And one of the things that is a sensitive topic is type safety. Now, we could go the dialyzer path, but we actually heard this today in an answer to one question. Also, it's a very similar story that what we tried to do, we were running dialyzer at the beginning in some way, and then it got forgotten. Then we tried to re-enable on CI, but it didn't really work out because we got all those warnings, and even re-enabling them step by step and fixing them, re-enabling the test cases for that, left us with 138 failures in the end. That most of them were real problems, but not easy to fix. So we decided to stop that project at that point in time. I learned that there's a Google Summer of Code project actually working on incremental updates, or a way to do this incrementally. So I'm looking forward to try this out at some point. Gets done. But we decided to actually change tactics. And we learned about the difference between strategy and tactics today in one of the talks. And I'm meaning tactics here, the smaller thing, not a big strategy. We still want to have it as type safe as possible. But let's talk a little bit about validation. And that actually brings open API specs back into the game. Because what we get with it is some validation on the input from the user. In that case here, the parameters array, that is the order reference. And that is just part of the booking code, like how to buy a ticket part. And you can see that it's also living documentation in here. If we change the code, we change the documentation. You saw that screenshot from the Swagger UI earlier. So it's one of the features from GraphQL which we are kind of copying here or stealing in some way. And the last part of that, basically, if you go into validation or working on types and models, we are getting into domain models. And we heard a little bit about domain-driven design today by Peter. And one of the questions actually was how to get started with that. And I think it's a step-by-step thing to do. And what we do with new code, we try to get this done. And that looks like we define a core model, which is an order. And it's not so important what is in that in detail now. So the more important part is it's a model. And we define a database schema order, which is an Ecto, basically, or just using Ecto for that on the database side. And then we convert between those two models. And now this is actually, I think this is the conversion between the front-end facing model, which allows us versioning, and the core model. And then there's another conversion between, or another translation to the database. That might sound a little bit complicated, and you might argue what's the point of that. I think the point is actually that we get some kind of safety out of it. We get versioning on the web-facing side or on the front-end facing side, and we get separation of concerns, which brings me back to the solid principles some way, and to the bounded context idea that is behind the domain-driven design. Now, all of this is no magic. I was really surprised that when I saw there's a picture at the Erlang solution booth, which also says no magic, same color scheme, shows a unicorn. I skipped the part of the unicorn. So all of you can do that if you want to do that, I think. Following best practices, continuously improve your code, get more readable code. That was, I think Philip and Georgi mentioned this in one of their answers, that this was one of the things they learned when writing Elixir, and they got into a mode where the code get more and more readable. For us, a adapted solid approach and the domain-driven design are working. I would not necessarily recommend that for everyone, but for us it's a possibility. Now, let's get back to the initial question. Is Elixir a cure for product development pains? You might guess that my answer is going to be yes in some way. And let's summarize first. Again, we saw the rapid prototyping. We saw that it helped, in our case, with unreliable third-party APIs. It enables best practices. It produces readable and hence maintainable code. It allows us to test. And we have an ecosystem which is actually sufficient for what we need. In other words, Elixir enabled us to work on the product, not on production. Didn't have to fight production. And it changes the way we look at travel. Because I started with this ticket here on paper. But it's actually about getting you to your destination. It's not about the ticket. You don't care about the ticket, I suppose. I'm not sure. So, about a nice product, or about some technical features we get with that language. Doing gradual rollout or prototyping, deploying new things into production without too much to be afraid of breaking things. Getting a new routing algorithm easily. Getting an API that is 10 times faster than the one before. So yes, it is a cure. From my point of view, it's not the philosopher's stone. That's actually not a reference to Harry Potter. Sorry. That's to the old magical thing that changes something into the elixir of life. So that's not what you can do with Elixir, but it's actually helping a lot if you use it in moderation, like with every remedy, with every medication. Use in moderation tips. Final slide. I want to say thanks to the team for helping and preparing that presentation, especially Dorian and Ed. Both of them we actually motivated to move to Berlin from London, and Max and Tobias, which have been very helpful. And I actually want to share one last, I have 2 more minutes, right? Sorry, okay. Because we saw these scenarios earlier about how Elixir could develop. And there were 3 different scenarios. I want to share a 4th one, which is somewhere in that scenarios. I'm pretty sure it's not going to be a niche tool or a specific solution. I hope it's not going to be a new Java where we get into copyright issues about API usages and have a company like Oracle deciding about the fate of it in some way. What I see happening is a gradual adoption, actually, of more companies or more developers learning Elixir, for starters, which gives us more prototypes, more working software, because those prototypes are going to be working software at some point. And that will make more companies use it, and then we will have more developers, more prototypes, and more companies. And so I see a circle of things, that circle of improvement there. And just for Qixxit, there's actually a company working on booking of flight integration in Berlin using Elixir, Fly-In. Might have heard about that. And at lunch I talked with Arjen, who is actually working on a chatbot, which would be something very helpful for us at some point in time when we have customers that have actually bought tickets that we need to fix. Right now, this is an outsourced solution for us. Or when we integrate that into our own system and have those combined intermodal tickets, we need to address a lot of different customer issues. And we could also solve that with Elixir. So that is really amazing. Thanks.
Thank you. So we have time for questions. So please feel free to get a comment.
Don't be afraid. There's
Yeah?
Maybe slightly more about Qixxit than Elixir, but when this kind of happened with airfares, one of the big companies involved was ITA, and they actually got themselves into a position where they ended up selling pretty well every North American Airlines data back to them in the form of a travel planning product, having been given the data about the fares on offer from the airlines in the first place. Do you see a future like that for Qixxit, where you're actually the platform that enables various travel companies to sell tickets, or are you trying to be more focused on the end consumer?
So we're definitely more focused on the consumer. I was actually, when Powell this morning was talking about a mobility platform, I don't want to build a platform. I want to build a working product for users, and that will grow internally into something which has some platform characteristics. And then, yes, one possibility would be to also work with the operators on optimizing that part. But that's the core idea, is to really make travel nice and easy and to get you to your destination. We have one somewhere over there.
Yeah.
Hi. So when you made the first prototypes using Elixir, did you consider other tools, languages? If yes, what? Then why did you end up choosing Elixir?
So I was not at Qixxit when this decision was made, so I cannot fully answer that. As far as I know, Elixir was the only real choice at that point in time. And I think what I showed you here was the features that it gives to you. Actually, this decision makes a lot of sense to me, especially as I'm coming from a company that was doing this with Java and had a lot of problems on handling the processes and the connections that got stuck.
Just turn around. More? Yeah.
Hey, thanks for the talk.
Welcome.
You mentioned that a year ago or a couple of years ago, you struggled to find Elixir developers, which implies that nowadays you are able to find it. Is that the case, or are you still retraining developers to Elixir within your own company?
So I think we got a lot of positive traction with the honeypot documentary, which changed things a lot for us in a way. But we are basically doing both. So we're getting people that already have some experience with Elixir, some applications also with people actually using Elixir in production. But we are also training. And I mean, I would not expect anyone to be a full expert in Elixir before joining us. It's a language, I think, where you continuously can learn new things, and you look at your code 3 months later and figure out you can do this in a completely different and way more elegant way. I think Kate was showing this nicely in her presentation, like how you move gradually through the pattern matching and learn more about it. And at the end, it was also probably for the people more experienced in Elixir getting interesting. And I think that happens anyway.
Thank you. Okay, so
No, go for
one last comment, because Claudio has run miles for us
It's
to
okay.
make that happen. So I would like, this is the last presentation, so I would like you to give him a big hand
Thank you.
for all the effort he put into that.